Isabel Hart didn't cry the day her father handed her over to the Apache chief. It wasn't courage that kept her dry-eyed, it was emptiness. Grief had hollowed her out long before that moment, the kind of grief that grows from being unloved, unseen, unwanted. When Virgil Hart, her father, spoke to the broad-shouldered man across the fire, trading her like livestock for a bundle of pelts and a few iron tools, Isabel stood as still as the rocks around them. Her dress hung from her frame like it belonged to someone else, her hair in a tangle, her face hidden beneath strands her stepmother had often called wild and unfixable. "She don't talk much," Virgil said flatly, as if apologizing for a mule with a bad leg. "Don't eat much, neither. I've got 5 more mouths to feed, and she ain't done a thing to earn her keep." The Apache man, whose name she didn't know yet, not that it mattered then, didn't respond. He only nodded once and dropped a small bundle beside the fire to seal the agreement. No one looked at her, and that perhaps was the part that stung the most. She wasn't being stolen, she was being discarded. A burden offloaded. But KL2 Rivers didn't touch her, didn't even raise his voice. He simply picked up a folded blanket, stepped toward her slowly, and handed it to her. Then he gestured toward his horse, not with command, but with quiet invitation. Something about his movements unsettled her. Not in fear, she was used to fear. This was something else, something that felt like space, like slints offered instead of stolen. They rode without speaking. He traveled ahead, his posture straight, one hand resting lightly on the reins. She followed her own mind, fraying at the edges with every hoofbeat. She wasn't afraid of being hurt, that would have made sense. Instead, what churned inside her was the unfamiliar weight of not being harmed. She had expected bruises, barked orders, or cold stares, but KL gave her none of it. Only distance and dignity, both things she had forgotten existed. Her mind spun with old memories, her father's disdain, her brother's mockery. The way townsfolk whispered that she'd be lucky if any man took her. That she was too thin, too plain, too dull to matter. Those voices had stitched themselves into her bones over the years. She wore them like scars no one could see, and yet, out here in the vast silence of the open land, those voices grew fainter, not gone but quieter. At sunset they stopped near a small creek where the cottonwoods leaned gently over the water like old sentinels. Kyle dismounted, scanned the horizon, then began gathering wood. He didn't look at her, not out of rudeness, but as if he was giving her space to arrive on her own terms. Isabel stood awkwardly by the horse, clutching the blanket like a shield. Finally, she asked, "Why didn't you say anything?" Kale didn't answer right away. Instead, he built a fire. Not large, not aggressive, just enough to warm them both. And in that silence, Isabel felt something stir in her chest. Not quite hope, not yet, but something close, something alive. That night, she sat wrapped in the blanket, listening to the crackle of the flames and the rush of the creek beyond. No one had shouted, no one had hit her, and no one had told her she was a mistake. It was the first time in years she felt like more than something left behind. The desert had a way of swallowing sound, just as Isabel's life had swallowed hope. As she walked behind KL2 Rivers through narrow sortstone passes and across sun-baked plains, her legs ached, but her heart remained the heaviest part of her. The silence between them was neither cold nor hostile, it was simply vast. And that vastness, oddly enough, was a kind of comfort. Kyle didn't stare, didn't question. He glanced over his shoulder now and then to make sure she hadn't lagged too far behind. But otherwise he let her come in her own time. It was the first time in memory that anyone had allowed her that choice. During their first night in the open wild, Kyle didn't sleep close to her. He didn't bark commands or throw scraps at her feet like her stepmother used to do with the dogs. Instead, he laid out a second bedroll a respectful distance from the fire and handed her a strip of dried meat without comment. She took it with hesitant fingers, unsure if it was a trap or a test. When he said nothing, simply stared into the flames with his arms crossed over his knees, she ate in silence, the flavor smoky and strange, but better than anything she'd had in weeks. In the mornings, Kyle moved with slow precision. He cleaned his tools, packed their supplies, and spoke little, only gesturing gently when it was time to move. But even in those gestures, there was no force, only rhythm. Isabel wasn't used to quiet leadership. Men like her father led with fists and volume. Kale led with presence. By the third day, the landscape began to change. The brittle scrub softened into low, fragrant sagebrush. They followed a stream that wound like silver thread through a canyon floor. And Kyle paused at intervals to point at plants and mutter their names. Chilgohwe, good for pain, or Nadlihi, berries don't eat. His English was broken but clear, and he never asked her to repeat after him. Still, something in her wanted to remember, to earn his language the way he had earned her silence. One evening, after she nearly tripped over a jagged root, Kyle caught her arm. His hand was firm but not rough, and the moment lasted only a heartbeat. Still, something inside her buckled. Not from the stumble, but from the fact that no one had touched her in years without making her feel small or ashamed. She blinked hard, fighting the tears that stung her eyes, not from pain, but from the strange, aching warmth of that gesture. Later that night, she sat beside the fire, cross-legged and fidgeting with the hem of her skirt. Kale rummaged through one of his woven satchels and produced a small leather pouch. He placed it in her lap and gestured for her to open it. Inside were dried petals, lavender sprigs, and shavings of something woody and sweet-smelling. "Put under where you sleep," he said softly, tapping the dirt beside her blanket. "Help good dreams." She didn't say anything. She couldn't. Her throat was tight and her heart was making it hard to breathe. The idea that someone, anyone, cared whether she had good dreams was so foreign that she didn't trust it at first. That night, lying beneath a sky so crowded with stars it looked like it might collapse, Isabel let the scent of herbs fill her nose and cried for the first time since her mother died. Not from fear, not from grief, but from a tenderness she didn't know she still had the capacity to feel. In the days that followed, she began to watch Kale more closely, not out of suspicion anymore, but out of something like wonder. He moved like the land was part of him, feet sure over gravel, hands fluent in branches and blades. He didn't command attention, he invited peace even when he wasn't trying, and the more she watched him, the more she realized how foreign that kind of peace felt, and how deeply she longed for it. They made camp one afternoon beneath a bluff where Kale laid out strips of rabbit meat to dry. Isabel sat nearby, idly twisting grass stems between her fingers. Without a word, he handed her a small bone needle and showed her how to lay sinew for cordage. She followed his gestures, carefully matching her rhythm to his, and he nodded once, a sign of approval that hit her harder than any praise she'd ever received. "You learn fast," he said quietly. She startled at the sound of his voice. It was the first complete sentence he'd said to her that wasn't about plants or sleeping. "No one ever taught me much," she replied, her voice cracking from disuse. Kyle looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into a side pouch and drew out a wooden comb. Its surface was smooth from age, the edges hand-carved with careful looping symbols. "My mother made," he said, "for the woman I would marry. She died before I find her." Isabel stared at the comb, her hand trembling slightly as she took it. It felt warm from his satchel, but also as if it had been waiting to be held, to be passed down. Not to the beautiful or the strong, but to someone who might finally understand. what it meant to be chosen for something other than usefulness. "You didn't have to take me," she whispered, voice barely audible. Kael answered slowly, meeting her eyes for the first time that night. "You looked sad." "I do not turn away sadness." That sentence, simple, unpolished, wrapped around her like that first blanket he gave her. It didn't heal her all at once, but it gave her permission to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worth keeping. The more miles they walked, the more Isabel began to sense that the land didn't just belong to Kael, it responded to him. He moved through the canyons like someone raised on the rhythm of wind and stone, not as a visitor, but as a thread woven into the land's memory. Isabel followed, sometimes just behind, other times beside him, her footsteps learning the beat of the trail. Though their words remained few, something quiet and steady was forming between them. Not quite trust, not yet friendship, but a recognition. He saw her, not her scars, not her strangeness, just her. Still, the feeling of safety was fragile, a thread easily frayed by the outside world. On the 7th day, they crested a hill overlooking a small Apache settlement nestled in a crescent of rock and pine. Smoke curled from earthen homes. Children chased chickens through red dust. The sight made something in Isabel ache, not because it felt foreign, but because it looked like what home should have been. As they descended into the village, heads turned. Whispers moved faster than footsteps. Kael walked ahead with the same unbothered stride he always had, but Isabel could feel the tension rippling around them. A group of women pulled their shawls tighter as she passed. A child pointed. One older boy muttered something sharp that made a nearby girl laugh. Isabel lowered her eyes and kept walking. They stopped near a fire pit where a group of elders sat in a half-circle. One of them stood as Kael approached, a wiry man with gray streaks in his braids and a voice like gravel. He spoke in their language and Isabel couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable anger laced with disbelief. Kael answered calmly, though his jaw had tightened. He didn't raise his voice, but he didn't bow either. The man pointed at Isabel, not gently, then spat in the dirt. Isabel's stomach turned. She didn't know whether to step back or hold her ground. Her feet did neither. They froze. Back home she would have folded, would have apologized for existing, would have tried to make herself invisible. But this wasn't home, and Kael stood between her and that man. Shoulders squared, eyes firm. He said something else, then something short and final, and whatever it was, the elder backed off. No one cheered. No one welcomed her, but the line had been drawn. Kael had drawn it, not with fire or violence, but with the unflinching stance of someone who had chosen her. That evening they camped just outside the village beneath a rock ledge overlooking the pine flats. The stars above were crisp and indifferent, and the fire between them flickered as if it too sensed the weight of the day. Isabel sat cross-legged on her blanket, staring into the flames. "They don't want me here," she said finally, not as a question but as a truth too sharp to hold in. Kael didn't speak right away. He stirred the fire with a stick, watching embers scatter like fireflies. "They think I brought you out of pity," he said at last, "or punishment." Isabel swallowed hard. "Am I?" His answer was silence, but not a cruel one, a thoughtful one. Then he reached into his pack and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. When he placed it in her hands, her breath caught. It was a carved medallion bone or antler, etched with delicate lines that curled like wind in riverbanks. It was beautiful, simple, sacred. "My mother made it," Kael said, his voice low, "for the woman I would marry." Isabel stared at the carving. Then, "Why give it to me?" He met her eyes, not shyly, not boldly, just honestly. Because when people looked at you, they saw what was missing. But I see what is still there. For a long moment, the night was quiet except for the wind brushing the tops of the trees. I don't understand what I am to you, she whispered. I'm not your wife. I'm not Apache. I'm not. You are with me, he interrupted gently. That is enough. And somehow it was. But even as her chest warmed, Isabel knew she was standing on the edge of something dangerous, a place between worlds. To the Apache, she was a stranger, maybe worse. To the people she'd left behind, she was a runaway, a possession gone missing. She didn't belong anywhere yet, but somehow she belonged with him. The next day, as they moved beyond the village and back into open country, Isabel didn't walk behind Kael. She walked beside him, her shoulders straighter, her steps more certain. Birds called overhead, and the sound of their boots on dry earth made a kind of rhythm. Kael glanced sideways once, and Isabel saw it, the faintest flicker of approval in his eyes. They stopped for water at a stream, and Isabel knelt without being told. She washed her hands, then helped refill the skins. As she handed one back to him, he murmured, You walk like you know where you're going now. I don't, she admitted, but I know who I want to walk beside. Kael nodded once. That was all. No grand gesture, no declaration. But in that moment, the space between them ceased to feel like distance. It felt like a bridge. They were 5 days beyond the village, moving through low canyons where cottonwoods whispered in the wind. When they came upon it, a broken wagon split at the axle and half sunken in a dry creek bed. One horse lay dead, its flank already bloating. The other trembled with terror, reins dragging. Kael raised a hand for Isabel to stop, then moved forward with careful steps, eyes scanning the terrain. From behind the ruined wagon, a soft cry, half prayer, half plea, pierced the silence. Isabel stepped closer, and there she saw her, a young white woman curled behind the wreckage, mud-streaked and bruised, one arm cradled against her chest, the other holding a rifle like a lifeline. The moment her gaze landed on Kael, she screamed, Don't touch me! Get away, savage! Isabel flinched at the word. It tore through the stillness like gunfire. Kael didn't move. His hands remained open, palms forward stance. Relaxed the same way he approached a skittish animal. It's okay, Isabel said gently, stepping into view. He's not going to hurt you. You're safe. The woman's blue eyes locked onto Isabel's, her expression shifting from panic to betrayal. You're with him, she spat, voice hoarse. What are you? His prisoner. Isabel didn't answer. She didn't have the words for what she was not then. Not yet. Despite the woman's rage, they stayed. Kael built a fire and tended to her wounds. Isabel calmed the surviving horse, fed it water from her own tin cup. By nightfall, the woman had stopped shaking, though she still wouldn't look at Kael without flinching. Her name was Evelyn Monroe, a preacher's daughter headed west with her husband, who had died 2 days earlier in a skirmish with raiders. Her voice was clipped, trained, every word loaded with the steel of a world that believed it already knew what was right. That night, while Kael cleaned the saddle, Isabel sat alone by the fire, her thoughts louder than the crackle of flame. She wrapped the blanket tight around her shoulders. Heart caught between fury and shame, Evelyn's words echoed, savage, prisoner, traitor. Isabel thought she had left all that behind. The judgment, the boxes others tried to stuff her into. But now, staring into the eyes of someone from back there, she felt herself shrinking again. How easy it was to be undone by a single word. When she finally asked Kael why he hadn't just left Evelyn to die, he didn't look up. She was alone, he said softly. I know how that feels. And so did Isabel. The next morning, Evelyn insisted there was a cavalry outpost less than a day's ride north, that they could take her there, that she'd be safe, and Isabel would too. The way she said it made it sound like a blessing. Like she was rescuing Isabel from something too savage to speak of. They reached the outpost by late afternoon. It rose from the plains like a wound wooden fencing canvas tents, a few scorched flagpoles flapping in the dry wind. Soldiers emerged quickly at the sight of Evelyn and Isabel, but when they saw Kael, the shift was immediate, from concern to suspicion. "Back away," Apache 1 barked, raising his rifle. "He's with me," Isabel said, stepping in front of Kael. "He saved her life. He saved mine." Another soldier grabbed her by the arm too tight. "Don't worry, miss. You're safe now. We'll deal with him." Kael didn't resist, didn't speak. He let them chain his wrists and force him to the dirt. Isabel screamed, struggling, but no one listened. The uniformed men who once ignored her now suddenly cared only because she was something to be put back where she belonged. In the command tent, Captain Silas Braddock, grizzled, sweat-stained, with a revolver on each hip, barely looked up as she stormed in. "Why are you holding him?" she demanded. Braddock sipped from a metal mug and shrugged. "Because he's Apache. That's reason enough in these parts. That man saved 2 lives. He's not a criminal." He leaned back, smiling thinly. "Maybe not, but we can't have men like him running loose. Makes folks nervous, especially women." That sentence, that smirk, shattered something inside her. Isabel turned and walked out before her fists could betray her. Outside, Evelyn sat comfortably by the fire pit, sipping tea from a real cup, like she hadn't just handed over the man who'd kept her alive. "Say something," Isabel snapped. Evelyn didn't meet her eyes. "It's better this way. You'll be safe now." Isabel stared at her. "You were never the one in danger." That night, when the camp settled into its usual rhythms of drunken laughter and half-asleep guards, Isabel knelt by the holding tent where Kael sat, wrists bound, bruises blooming beneath his cheekbone. He looked at her, calm as ever. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have brought you here." He shook his head slowly. "No, you needed to see." And he was right. She had needed to see it, the way the world only valued her when she was silent, compliant, separated from the kind of love that made her dangerous. Tears blurred her vision as she pressed her forehead to his. "I won't let them keep you." Kael exhaled the soft, trembling breath of a man who had waited years for someone to say that. The night air was heavy with gun oil and the arrogance of men who believed their uniforms made them righteous. Isabel waited, crouched in the shadow of the quartermaster's shack, heart pounding in her throat. From the holding tent, Kael's silhouette was motionless, a mountain carved in shadow, wrists bound back straight. The guards near him had begun to nod off, rifles loose in their laps, lulled by whiskey and self-satisfaction. The whole outpost slept like it had already won. But Isabel wasn't the same girl who'd walked in here unsure, apologetic, hoping for justice to be handed to her. She wasn't asking anymore. She moved quickly, hands sure guided by instinct and purpose. Inside the storage shed, she found a rusted hatchet, a length of rope, and, miracle of miracles, a pair of bolt cutters left carelessly on a shelf. She tucked them beneath her shawl and walked as if she belonged her boots. Silent on hard earth, her breath steady as steel. At the tent, Kael looked up. He didn't speak, didn't ask. He simply watched as she slipped inside her fingers, trembling only slightly as they cut through the chains at his wrists. "If we run, they'll follow," he murmured. "Let them," she whispered. "Let them see what it looks like when someone fights for the thing they were told they didn't deserve." They moved before the moon could betray them, slipping into the trees at the edge of the camp. Isabel's smaller frame darted ahead, checking paths, ears tuned to every shift of wind. Kael, despite his bruises, kept pace, guiding them east toward a canyon. He said the cavalry wouldn't dare enter sacred ground the soldiers feared more than bullets. By dawn, they'd reached the mouth of the ravine. Steep cliffs rose like teeth on either side and the sky a sliver overhead. Isabel dropped to her knees, breath ragged not from exertion, but from the weight of all she had finally let go. The lies, the shame, the need to be accepted by people who only saw her as something to control or discard. "They'll call me a traitor," she said aloud, not to him but to the wind. Kael crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her dirt-streaked face. Only those afraid of truth used that word. They traveled for 3 more days, hiding beneath stone outcrops, eating what Kael could hunt: a rabbit here, wild berries there. Though her body ached, Isabel never once suggested turning back. Every step forward felt like a declaration. She wasn't just running, she was reclaiming. On the 4th morning, they stumbled upon a small clearing by a spring. There beside a fire sat an old woman with silver braids and eyes like dusk. She didn't startle at their arrival. Instead, she nodded once as if she'd known they were coming. "This is my aunt," Kael said. "She once was healer. Now she sees." The woman studied Isabel, gaze soft but sharp. "You were not given," she said in accented English. "You were found." That night around the fire, Isabel lay wrapped in the same blanket Kael had given her on the first night. Her eyes scanned the stars, now free of tents and fences and the judgment of men who'd never known hunger or heartbreak. She loved him. It hit her quietly, not like thunder but like a tide. Not because he'd rescued her, but because he never asked her to be anything but herself. In Kael's silence, she'd heard more truth than in a lifetime of sermons. In his actions, she'd found a love without conditions. But peace in the West is a thin thread, and it frays fast. On the 12th day, while gathering roots near the ridge, Isabel saw them riders. 5, maybe 6, blue coats, rifles glinting in the morning sun, Captain Braddock among them, and Evelyn Monroe, her arm in a sling face, tight with determination. Isabel ran back to camp, breath slicing her throat. "They found us," she gasped. "They're coming." Kael stood, not in panic but with the tired steadiness of a man who had always known peace wouldn't be gifted, it had to be earned. "Take my aunt," he said. "Hide in the ravine." "No." Her voice was sharp, sure. "I'm not leaving you. If they take me again, they'll make it permanent." "Then they'll have to take me too," she said. Her hands trembled, but her spine didn't bend. "I'm not dying for you, Kael. I'm living for what you taught me. That's different." When the soldiers rode into the clearing, the world stilled. Braddock dismounted slowly, rifle resting in the crook of his arm. "Let the girl go," he said. "You can still walk out of this, miss." Isabel stepped forward. "No," she said. "He's not your prisoner. He's my husband." She didn't look at Kael when she said it. She didn't need to. The words didn't need ceremony. They were truth. Braddock scoffed. "You're not married. I don't need your blessing." He gave me his blanket. He gave me his fire. He gave me back my name. The silence was deep. Then from behind the ranks, a younger soldier muttered, "Sir, they ain't hurting anyone." Braddock hesitated. Evelyn looked down. Kael stood beside her, a pillar of quiet resolve. "This isn't over," the captain spat, but he turned his horse. And they left. Isabel didn't cry. She didn't cheer. She just reached for Kael's hand, and he took it, calloused, warm, real. In that moment, they weren't fugitives or misfits. They were free. The seasons shifted slowly in the high canyon, but change had taken root long before the trees began to bud. Isabel rose with the sun now, not because anyone demanded it, but because she wanted to. She and Kael worked side by side, planting corn in the rich valley soil. weaving nets, gathering herbs, building something real with their bare hands. Their life together was not built on vows or ceremony. There was no altar, no lace, no preacher to proclaim their union, only the soft press of her hand against his, the shared labor, the laughter between long stretches of silence, and the way Kael still waited each night to see if she would sit beside him at the fire. She always did. She didn't call herself a wife. She didn't need to. She was his partner, equal and whole. He never tried to own her, and in that freedom she offered him everything. There were visitors from time to time, a traveling trader, a Comanche cousin passing through, even a lone priest who asked no questions, and left a loaf of bread in thanks for Kael's healing herbs. Word of them spread through the territories, though none could say exactly where they lived. Some called it legend, the Apache man and the white woman who'd faced down a cavalry patrol and walked away unscathed. Some whispered about a girl once sold by her father, now untouchable. Isabel didn't care. Let them talk. She hadn't chosen Kael to prove anything to the world. She had chosen him because in his presence she finally saw herself. One morning, while washing clothes in the stream, she caught her reflection in the water, sunburned cheeks, wild hair, hands rough from work. But this time she didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She saw strength in her face, a kind of unshakable beauty that had nothing to do with how she'd been measured before. When word reached them months later that Virgil Hart, the man who'd once bartered her away like a broken shovel, had died alone in a southern town, Isabel said nothing. She felt no hatred, no triumph, only release like a rope slipping off her shoulders. That night, she planted wildflowers beside the stream, not for him, but for the girl she used to be, the one no one wanted, who somehow survived anyway. Kael came up behind her, wrapping her in the same blanket he'd offered on that first night long ago. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She leaned into him, her hand resting over his heart, and breathed. "No one will ever give you away again," he whispered, and this time she believed it. Their love had no witnesses, no signature in a church ledger. But it was written into every stone they stepped on, every fire they built, every silent promise they kept. It wasn't loud, it wasn't proper, but it was true, and finally it was theirs. Sometimes the greatest freedom we can claim isn't a place we run to. It's the moment we stop apologizing for surviving the life we were handed. Isabel's journey reminds us that healing doesn't always come in the form of rescue or justice delivered from the outside. Often it begins quietly through small acts of dignity, patient kindness, and the courage to believe that we are worthy of more than what the world has told us. We live in a time where many people feel discarded, misjudged, or invisible, shaped by the cruelty or indifference of others. But this story teaches us a radical truth: you are not what was done to you. You are not the names others gave you, the rejections you absorbed, or the roles you were forced to play. Like Isabel, we may find ourselves standing between two worlds, the one that broke us and the one we have yet to build, and it takes enormous strength to choose the unfamiliar path. But when we do, when we walk toward the people and places that honor our worth rather than diminish it, we begin to write a new kind of legacy. One rooted not in revenge or shame but in love that doesn't need to be earned, an identity that no longer requires permission. We may not all face cavalry or fire, but we all reach moments where we must decide: will I let others define my value, or will I choose to claim it for myself? The answer to that question can change everything. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or like you had to fight just to be whole, you're not alone. Here at Frontier Reverie, we honor the untold stories of strength, survival, and quiet love on the edge of the world. If you believe in the power of redemption and the beauty of chosen family, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Help us keep these true-hearted tales alive, one story, one soul, one frontier at a time.